Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and this video we're breaking down Psycho. Directed by the master of suspense, Psycho's probably Alfred Hitchcock's most famous film. It's the mother of the slasher genre, and it pioneered so many things that we still see today. Psycho follows Marion Crane, who's on the run after stealing money from work. On the road, she finds herself at the Bates Motel, which is when the film takes a swift left turn. Run by the odd but charming Norman Bates and his mother, we discover their strange family dynamic. Considered one of the first psychological thrillers, the film's filled with deeper meaning and symbolism. There's lots of nods to the real-life story of Ed Gein, who also inspired the movie. Now, Psycho was a truly groundbreaking moment in cinema. Based on the 1959 novel by Robert Bloch, Hitchcock's innovative camera work and directing explored the primal fears of humanity in ways never seen before. Comparing the art of directing to composing music, every shot in Psycho is deliberate and meticulously planned. This all builds towards its chilling conclusion, which possesses one of the biggest twists in cinema. Throughout this video, we're going to be breaking down this horror classic, as well as the techniques Hitchcock used that make Psycho such a terrifying and enduring film. If you enjoy it, please hit the thumbs up, and make sure you subscribe for our videos like this that I know you guys are going to love.
No, Paul, I'll never subscribe. Your channel is worthless. Ryan Airy is way better. You suck, Paul. You suck screen crush nuts.
No, mother!
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Now, Psycho's one of those movies where the film clearly outshines the source material. Similar to Jaws and The Godfather, I'd hazard a guess that most don't even know it was based on a book, and definitely not me until like 2 years ago. The story is though that Hitchcock was one day strolling through an airport looking for something to read before his flight. This is where he stumbled across the novel by Robert Bloch, which lays down most of the groundwork. Instantly, Hitchcock was hit with how big of a movie this could be, but it was difficult convincing others.
Why?
Well, America was going through a wave of censorship where companies were tasked with shutting down indecency. This was mirrored in Hitchcock's home of Paramount, who felt it was wrong to relish in the kills. They didn't see how they could make a commercial hit with this, and felt like the movie would be met with complaints. Gein had gained worldwide publicity just 3 years prior, and the whole thing felt like it was gonna be in bad taste. So Hitchcock took it to a competing studio that were known for their monster movies. That was of course Universal, who had several hits with stuff like Dracula, The Mummy, Wolfman, Invisible Man, and also Frankenstein. They took the risk and greenlit the picture, but, and this sounds crazy to say now, nobody thought this movie would do well, which is insane because it's the film that Hitchcock's remembered for. However, because of that, everything was done low risk. Hitchcock used his TV crew because they were cheaper, and the whole thing was going to be shot in black and white. Though killer film stock was readily available, black and white stock cost a lot less. Hitchcock also knew it was going to be difficult marketing the movie, so he did what was probably the first form of viral marketing. Hitchcock bought up as many books as he could to hide the twist, and he had chairs and dressing rooms done up for Mrs. Bates to make people think someone was playing her. Guards were placed at cinemas to keep people locked out if they turned up late, and there was a mystique around the movie. Things were kept under wraps so the censors couldn't watch it, and slowly they rolled it out across the country. No one knew the twist going in, and this was kept secret for a long time. So there was definitely a mystery around the movie, which, looking back, is kind of weird to think about. I think these days, it's impossible to watch this movie without thinking about the twist the whole time. I had it spoiled before ever seeing it, and I think at this point, Norman Bates being the mother is just part of the zeitgeist. It's up there with stuff like Darth Vader being Luke's father and The Sixth Sense. Bruce Willis is dead in The Sixth Sense. Sorry for spoiling that. Because of that though, it's difficult to put yourself in the mind state where you just don't know about it. The shower scene, Norman in the wig, the skeletal mother, it's all part of the public consciousness now, but yeah, back then, it was a major surprise. Now, upon booting up the 4K Blu-ray, you're met with two versions of the film. The first is Psycho Uncut, which is the extended one shown in theaters. The second is the more widely seen version, which was made for TV broadcasts, theatrical re-releases, and most of the home releases. So if you watch it on VHS, you probably watch this version. Those bloody censors. We will of course be doing the uncut version though, as that's more fitting with Hitchcock's vision. Now, we start off the film with the infamous Psycho theme. As the credits roll, names are sliced in half and instantly it has you gripped. The theme is incredible and it's probably one of the most memorable of all time. Composed by Bernard Herrmann, he also worked on Hitchcock's film Vertigo, North by Northwest, and The Man Who Knew Too Much. And the title sequence was specifically designed to subtly relate the theme to murder in the audience's mind, priming them to how music will be used throughout the film. We're going to talk a lot about how music is used throughout the movie, as it's one of the most effective elements in heightening the horror. Hitchcock himself, he even attributed 33% of the film's effect to the music. Because of this, he doubled Herrmann's salary due to how impressed he was by it. It's similar to the theme from Jaws and one of the most iconic parts of the movie. And we will be using the word iconic a hell of a lot in this video. Choosing to use only strings for the entire film, they create this stabbing idea with the stings during the knife strikes. Beyond that, the Psycho theme is used very deliberately throughout the movie to shape the audience's feeling of morality and indicate that something bad's about to happen.
Killing off any and everything you're talking about. See you in the club, now we walking you out. Should've thought twice before you went and open your mouth. Yo!
The film then opens with a wide shot of Phoenix, Arizona. Here, we voyeuristically go into an apartment window where we meet two of our main characters. This shot was actually extremely difficult to pull off due to technology at the time. The skyline was photographed and then the dissolves were used to create the panning effect. Originally, they wanted to use a helicopter but found it was far too jumpy. Cameras also didn't really autofocus, so each moment was meticulously planned, especially the move from outside to inside and then panning up to the bed. This was done on a soundstage because of the prior issues, but overall, you wouldn't really notice they were different environments. It's here that we then meet our two star-crossed lovers in Marion and Sam. Coming from his beginnings in silent film, Hitchcock used certain shots and camera angles to evoke different emotions. A wide tracking shot to a close shot is typically used by Hitchcock to reveal a hidden secret. In this case, it's the relationship between Marion and Sam. As we learn, they aren't out in the open, and thus this conveys their secretive nature. We also get the date of Friday, December 11th, telling us when the story takes place. Surprisingly though, this doesn't really hold any significant meaning and doesn't play into the plot of the film. According to Stephen Rebello on the Psycho DVD commentary though, the reason for the date actually comes from a scheduling mistake in production. The second unit filmed in Arizona during Christmas time, with decorations being strung up throughout the town. Since the decorations could be seen in the film, Hitchcock then decided, set the story in December. Once in the apartment, we see Marion and Sam after getting it on, with both of them half clothed and Marion lying in bed wearing a white bra. Now, we have to remember that this was the 60s where premarital sex was seen as a major no-no in society. This is mainly where the secret of their relationship lies. Neither of them are cheating on their partners, but they have to hide that they're being sexually active. While it may seem silly now, this was actually the first film to show two people half clothed lying on the same bed. Or half naked. I'm even being a prude myself. It was also the first time we saw a major star wearing a bra. Don't mean to harp on about Marion's bra too much, but there is some significance to it that I'll talk about later on. Just pay attention to her bra, and don't say it out loud that you're paying attention to her bra. Most people already know this, but I feel like I also have to mention that Janet Leigh is the real-life mother of Jamie Lee Curtis. Sam's full name is also Samuel Loomis, and Carpenter called Donald Pleasance's character Dr. Samuel Loomis. In H2O, Laurie drives a similar car to Marion, and her alias in the movie is also Norma. So lots of connections there. As the two get dressed, we then learn that Marion wishes they had a more respectable relationship. She's basically desperate to get married and have the picturesque life. She wishes they could be more in the open, and Sam could come to her house for dinner with her sister and her mother's picture on the mantel.
Oh, we can see each other. We can even have dinner. But respectably. In my house, with my mother's picture on the mantel, and my sister helping me broil a big steak for 3.
This symbolizes Marion's desire for safety in her relationship with Sam, as they would be under the gaze of authority and have to prove their relationship's not sinful. This is later paralleled when Marion and Norman have dinner in his parlor, which sits in the shadow of the Bates house under the watch of his mother. We get another reference to this in the scene where the camera focuses in on a sandwich. This is what Norman and Marion eat in the parlor, making it a dark reflection of this scene.
And after the steak, did we send sister to the movies, turn mama's picture to the wall?
Sam.
I'll point this out a couple times throughout the video, but the scene also frames Marion and Sam from the side. Hitchcock typically uses sideways shots to show guilt, with the secret here being that Marion feels guilt about their relationship, and also the idea of skipping out on work for sex. The real tragedy from this opening also comes from where we leave things off in the story. The book tells us that it's Sam and Marion's sister who end up married, which is another part of her tragic tale. Ironically, we also have Marion and a young man in a hotel room discussing the future and their burdens, which is a scene that's repeated later with Norman. Now, while Marion expresses her wishes for their relationship to change, we learn that Sam's drowning in debt from his father and ex-wife. Though he agrees to wanting to marry her, this is what's preventing him. However, Marion doesn't care as long as they can be together.
Oh, Sam, let's get married.
Tell you what, when I send my ex-wife for alimony, you can lick the stamps.
I'll lick the stamps.
We then fade to Marion getting back to work and avoiding her boss due to her late lunch, aka being a sinner at dinner. Just as she enters the office, you might also notice a man standing on the sidewalk. This is none other than Alfred Hitchcock making his usual director's cameo. Now we learn that her boss is out with a wealthy man looking to buy some property. Relieved, Marion talks to her co-worker about having a headache, and the woman offers her some medicine which her mother gave her on her wedding day.
My mother's doctor gave them to me the day of my wedding. Teddy was furious when he found out I'd taken tranquilizers.
Which again is that constant focus on mothers.
Any calls?
Teddy called me. My mother called to see if Teddy called.
The conversation doesn't seem like much of anything, but the mention of both her mother and a wedding all works to further influence Marion's desire for that respectable relationship. This feeds into her ultimate decision to steal the money so that she and Sam can get married. We also learn that Marion's sister called her to tell her she'll be out of town, which will come back later. As the girls chat, they're gossiping away, their boss and the rich businessman come back from their lunch. The rich man comments that it's as hot as fresh milk outside, which kind of plays into him being a cowboy and drinking direct from the teat. Yeehaw! The man boasts about how rich he is though, and that he's spending $40,000 on a house for his daughter's wedding, being braggadocious while also being condescending and sexual towards Marion. He mentions that he doesn't buy happiness, but he instead buys off unhappiness. He's basically a sleaze, which further pushes Marion to wanting to be away from men like this and become a housewife who's happily in love. This also subtly plants the idea in Marion's mind to steal the money. This is her ultimately buying off her unhappiness, as the man suggests. He flashes the cash in her face and also says that he never carries more than he can afford to lose. This kind of makes the audience instantly sympathetic to Marion's reasoning to take the money, as we immediately see this guy's a bad person who deserves to be robbed if anything. Subtext is for cowards.
I declare.
I don't. That's how I get to keep it.
This is all by design though, with much of Hitchcock's work in building suspense hinging on the audience being able to relate to the main character, whether they're good or bad. As Hitchcock said, "In order for suspense to work, the main character has to be an everyday person. An innocent man is pulled into a bizarre series of events. The audience is terribly worried because the same thing can happen to them. North by Northwest is something similar, and there it plays off mistaken identity. Here, we instantly relate to Marion, which makes us justify her decision to steal the money. Deep down though, I think we all know Marion would never get away with it. Eventually, the police would have caught her, or she'd have been on the run with Sam forever. This technique is later paralleled with Norman, as he initially is depicted as just an odd but likable guy who wants to escape his overbearing mother. Inherently, this makes the audience want to root for him, and going in without knowing the twist, we also see him as a victim of his elders. Now, this being such a large sum of money, I think they worked it out in like 2020, that's like $350,000 these days, but yeah, quite a lot of money. So Marion's tasked with putting it in the bank until the following Monday. Now, this is something I might be reaching about, but when Marion goes into the boss's office, there's a painting of 5 men positioned to the left of the frame, all looking at her. I couldn't track down what this painting is, but I feel like it has to be there for a reason. My best guess is that it relates to the male gaze and voyeurism, and this is a theme that's littered throughout the movie. Norman, of course, watches Marion changing, and this further plays into the idea of unlocking his dark desires for her. He does this by shifting out a painting, so having a painting staring at her makes sense. There's also a very specific meaning behind that specific painting that he moves out the way, but yeah, I'll go into that later in the breakdown. Have you got 2 hours? You're gonna enjoy it. We then fade into Marion's apartment and focus on the money sitting on her bed. This sort of shot is another classic Hitchcock technique known as a MacGuffin, which yeah, I'm sure you've heard of. You love 2-hour long film analysis, but this was basically Hitchcock's defining term for an item that pushes the plot forward. He said that a MacGuffin can be any object in the film that creates a pivotal reason for suspense or an action to occur. This is used to further the audience's relationship with the main character, as we don't really care about the money itself, only if Marion's caught with it. MacGuffins are used in almost any movie you watch now, with a more recent example being the Infinity Stones in the MCU. We don't care about the stones per se, but rather the implication that it brings for the heroes. The MacGuffin's also used as a way to bring the audience's attention to one specific detail while pulling them away from another. In this case, by focusing so much on the money in the first part of the movie, the audience instinctively put their guard down as danger is now seemingly gone or out of sight. Also, notice that Marion's now wearing a black bra instead of the white one she wore earlier. She also has a black purse in place of the white one she had at the office. This change in wardrobe is meant to symbolize that Marion's given into her dark desires to take the money for herself. If you've ever watched an old western, you can instantly tell who the good guys are right away. They pretty much always wear the white hats, whereas the guys that wear the black ones are normally the baddies. This was even brought up in Westworld when guests of the park would choose their hat to define their path. So her wearing white and then donning black when she commits a crime is highly important. She's basically gone from being angelic to then turning evil. This is further emphasized by the fact that her packed suitcase is sitting right next to it. We then get a close-up of Marion as her eyes move between the money and suitcase, and we can see her starting to contemplate the decision. Not only does this moment highlight Janet Leigh's acting chops, but also Hitchcock's genius as a director. You see, kids, Hitchcock believed that a person's reaction to what is being said or not being said is what brings an audience in. He noticed that in using differences in proximity to the actor's face could often give a different emotional impact. Hitchcock even stated, "People don't always express their inner thoughts to one another. A conversation may be quite trivial, but often the eyes reveal what a person thinks or needs." Learning to cut down dialogue as much as possible while working on silent films to reduce the amount of cuts in a film, Hitchcock believed that one should only resort to talking when it's impossible to do otherwise. Using these techniques together, Hitchcock crafted what he called a visual sentence to convey a character's thought process. You can make him look at one thing and look at another. Without speaking, you can show the mind at work comparing things. There's complete freedom. It's limitless. Instead of Marion having a dialogue with herself about whether or not she should take the money, her eyes tell everything the audience needs to know and makes us feel like we're also in on the secret. As Marion's mind races, she looks at herself in the mirror, which is probably the biggest piece of symbolism in the film. Almost every set in Psycho contains a mirror. Before this, we saw one in the very opening scene of Marion and Sam in their hotel room, as well as Marion using a hand mirror at work. Now, I didn't point these out before because this is the first time we actually see Marion's reflection. A lot of the film centers around Sigmund Freud's concept of the uncanny double and its relationship to the three levels of human subconscious. Those are the id, ego, and superego. First proposed in his essay Beyond the Pleasure Principle, a person's id is the primal impulses and desires which Freud described as the dark, inaccessible part of our personality. The id is only concerned with satisfaction of drives in accordance to pleasure, and it's neither good or evil, but simply instinctual. Here, Marion's giving into her id to satisfy her desire to be with Sam, despite knowing that taking the money's wrong. This creates Marion's uncanny double. This is the dark reflection of her forbidden and repressed impulses. This is something that's familiar, yet also unfamiliar. It elicits a unique response in a person where they don't know how to respond as the dangers are known. Freud proposed that the uncanny yields a sense of horror and even disgust, as that which is hidden from the public eye must be dangerous. A dark double is a common theme in movies today, and whether it's a person's reflection doing something different, shadows, or even twins, this constantly pops up. It also just explains why the twins are so creepy in The Shining. Being confronted by her uncanny double, Marion criticizes herself as she becomes aware of and consumed by the unacceptable parts of her psyche. The concept of the uncanny or uncanny double is something we as humans have evolved to instinctively fear. Psychologists have determined that it triggers a state of uncertainty in our fight or flight response. It's scary because the self is familiar, but when you put it into an unfamiliar situation, We're forced to protect the self from becoming the evil double that we all have. This theme of the uncanny and Freud's model of subconscious comes up a lot, especially as it relates to Norman, but it has a very basic concept. We also see as Marion takes the money that there's a photo of her parents on the wall behind her. This brings back the theme of being under the gaze of authority. At the beginning of the film, Marion wanted to have dinner with Sam under the gaze of her mother's picture. This symbolized something good or gaining approval. Here, Marion's uncanny double steals the money with no regards to the picture, showing that her id is now fully in control and is only concerned with satisfying her desire for Sam. As Marion drives away in her car, the camera focuses on her face as she imagines Sam's reaction to her taking the money. When stopping at a light, she sees her boss and the man with the money, and it's here that we're hit with a psycho theme for the very first time since the credits. She then speeds off, and I did wonder if this was to say to the audience who were watching for the first time that she could be the titular psycho. I feel like Barbarian borrowed a lot from this movie, and you have these constant left turns and things coming out of nowhere. That title also plays into that idea as well, as we don't know who the Barbarian is for most of the movie. This being the first time we hear the theme again, it establishes a link between the music and something bad happening. The theme also begins to get more and more intense as Marion drives, signaling that this is the moment, there's no turning back. Marion then drives off into the darkness, having fully become her own dark reflection. We then fade into the next morning where Marion's woken up by a police officer while she sleeps at the side of the road. This cop just kind of questions her about what she's doing and where she's going. Basically, it becomes a nothing burger, but it's the perfect example of some of Hitchcock's greatest techniques in building tension. We assume this James Wood looking cop knows about the money, but in fact he's just asking general questions.
There are plenty of motels in this area.
This question also later gives her the idea to stop at one to avoid suspicion. Side note, when the cop looks at Marion's license plate, it reads ANL 709.
Good night, everybody.
Which is fucking hilarious. I have to believe this is for a reason though, because Marion's second car, the license plate reads NFB 418, which has been clarified in all the trivia throughout the years that this means nice fucking body. Or Norman fucking Bates. Woo! Now we get lots of close-up shots between Marion and the officer, and the audience being in on the secret of the money puts us in the same seat as Marion looking from her POV. This makes us feel her fear and anxiety. This follows one of Hitchcock's primary rules for building tension. That is to provide the audience with information that then drives the action. This technique was best described by Hitchcock, who used the analogy of a bomb, and I will be doing my impression. 4 people are sitting around the table talking about baseball. Whatever you like. 5 minutes of it very dull. Suddenly a bomb goes off, blows the people to smithereens. What do the audience have? 10 seconds of shock. Now take the same scene and tell the audience that there's a bomb under the table and that it'll go off in 5 minutes. Now the whole emotion of the audience is totally different because you've given them that information. Now their conversation about baseball becomes very vital because they're saying to you, don't be ridiculous. Stop talking about baseball. There's a bomb under there. You've got the audience working. This also worked in Hitchcock's 3-step structure in order to build suspense where you first plant a secret. In this case, the money. Then the character encounters a number of close calls, i.e. Marion running into her boss and now the police officer. Finally, we relieve the suspense with a twist. Continuing the bomb analogy, Hitchcock says, the bomb must never go off, because if it does, you've worked your audience into a state and then they'll get angry because you haven't provided them with any relief. That's almost a must. Putting the audience in this state of helplessness is one of the things that makes Hitchcock's work so captivating and unsettling. A good recent and literal example of this can be seen in The Dark Knight, where Joker threatens to blow the 2 boats in the harbour. However, the bomb doesn't go off despite everything leading up to that moment telling us that it will. Now I also realised I said recent example, it's like nearly 20 years ago. What really makes the scene impressive though is Hitchcock's willingness to let the audience sit in their discomfort. The cop continues to follow her even after letting her go while the psycho theme blares. As he's following her, we cut from a reaction to a POV shot of her looking at the cop from the rearview mirror, which is another instance of a mirror reflecting a dark reality. The cop eventually gets off on an exit, but the theme continues to play until Marion arrives at the car shop. This gives us relief though, as we now think she's safe. This was actually Harry Mayher's car lot near Universal, with the lot being replaced by Fords due to the company sponsoring Alfred Hitchcock Presents. It is still kinda edgy though.
I'm in no mood for trouble.
What?
There's an old saying, first customer of the day is always the most trouble. But like I say, I'm in no mood for it, so I'm going to treat you so fair and square that you won't have one human reason to give me.
Can I trade my car in and take another?
Do anything you've a mind to.
However, this relief doesn't last long as the cop returns and parks right across the street to watch her. Marion is clearly panicked and just doing lots of dumb things to try and escape the trap. And ultimately, she makes herself seem even more suspicious, which is something she dwells on in her ride. Trying to ditch her car for her great escape, Marion trades in the ride along with $700 and the cop begins to approach her. The setup of this moment is also really clever as the cop gets in his car and for a moment, we think he's going to leave. This makes us again breathe a sigh of relief, only for him to pull directly in front of the dealership. We also get another shot of a mirror and Marion's reflection when she goes to the bathroom to take the $700 out. This is from the stolen money and once again shows how her uncanny double's now in control. Then comes another close call for Marion as she forgets her bags and is stopped from leaving. We then see the officer slowly walking towards her and also us. He nearly reaches the car, but Marion just manages to get away. This cop is never even shown again, making it a scene specifically designed just to scare people and prepare them for what's to come. It's a moment that makes you want to jump at the screen and tell her to run, which is how you know that the film's been successful in conditioning the audience to fear for Marion's safety. It also kinda makes us complicit in her crime. As she drives away, she begins to hear the voices of the police officer questioning the car salesman and then her boss as she begins to panic. Now, there has been a lot of back and forth over whether this is real or simply in her head. Though this is never being cleared up, I think we can read into it and figure out the truth. Marion stole the money fully in the knowledge that her boss wouldn't check on it until Monday. So at this point, no one would know that it's missing or even be on the lookout.
Carolyn? Marion still isn't in?
No, Mr. Lowry, but then she's always a bit late on Monday mornings.
The fact it isn't Monday yet highlights this is all in her head. I also think these imagined voices play into how Norman imagines his own mother. Both hear disembodied voices which play into their guilt. This also plays in a Freud's model as it's Marion's superego trying to overcome her id. Being the part of the personality that internalizes social rules and criticizes the expression of taboo drives, feelings and actions, the superego is basically what keeps a person's id contained. The superego is what most people refer to as one's conscience. Freud believed it developed during the state of helplessness a child feels during the Oedipus complex. The Oedipus complex is kind of complicated, but basically it boils down to a boy feeling hostile towards their father for possessing their mother.
Hey, Josephus! Hey, motherfucker!
It's the reverse for girls where they resent the mother for affection and possession of the father. Again, playing into these themes of mothers. Freud proposed that the Oedipus complex becomes repressed by the influence of authority, religion, and learning about the world. However, the more powerful the Oedipus complex is for the individual and the more rapidly it's suppressed, the more it leads to a stricter domination of the superego over the ego. This manifests later on in the form of unconscious guilt. Here, Marion's superego takes the form of her boss as the parental authority who criticizes her for taking the money. It tries to overtake the id, acting on its instinctive desires, similar to how Norman later hears the voice of his mother, which constantly belittles him. The Oedipus complex and superego play a major role in the dynamic between Norman and his mother, so we will touch upon it more as it relates to him in a bit. Also, I just want to point out that I'm not a psychologist, I just play one on YouTube. So for anyone who has actually studied this stuff in depth, please comment below to clarify anything I may have missed or your own interpretation. You might also notice that we rapidly shift from day to night. This is done to put us in the viewpoint of Marion as she's unaware of the time passing due to how focused she is on what she's done. If you've ever done anything naughty, then you'll know anxiety can overcome you and make you dwell on it for hours at a time, even days sometimes.
Okay, time's up.
We also see a vignette around her face and the background gets blurrier. This also signifies Marion exiting her everyday life and entering the uncanny side of Norman's world. International director of the Birkbeck Institute for Humanities, Slavjov Zizek, uses the analogy of a Mobius strip in the book The Parallax View. He says this showcases the switch into the uncanny and the parallels between Marion and Norman. Marion's world is the world of the contemporary American everyday life, whereas Norman's world is its nocturnal reverse. The The relationship between these two worlds is that of the two surfaces of the Mobius strip. If we progress far enough on one surface, all of a sudden we find ourselves on its reverse. So not only do each of them have their own uncanny double, they are also uncanny doubles of each other, which is later emphasized when we switch the focus to Norman later in the film. As Marion continues to drive, she hears the voice of the rich man whom she stole the money from talking about how she robbed him. She flashes a quick little smile, almost exactly like Norman's at the very end. This further plays into them being doubles of each other. Here Marion is fully giving into her uncanny double, just like how the mother takes over Norman. Marion has fully travelled across her side of the Mobius strip and has found herself on its stark reflection. The score intensifies as the rain begins to pound more and more, and the shots of Marion driving through the rain are meant to parallel her later death. In the shower, the wiper blades cut through the rain, and this symbolises being stabbed. It's expertly done, and some of Hitchcock's best subliminal work. Quick detail as well before we move on. When Marion pulls into the motel, a studio light can be seen to the left just below the Bates Motel sign. This was pointed out to Hitchcock right before they released the movie, but he decided to keep it in as he felt no one would notice. And sorry Al, but we got you, mate. We got you, you fuck.
Yeah, I'm gonna nail your ass. I'm gonna nail your ass.
Yep, I nailed his ass.
Mary then walks up to the office to find no one there. She then goes around the corner to see the Bates family home looming over the hotel. It's extremely ominous and one of the best changes from the book. There the house was attached to the hotel with it being part of the layout. However, just having the house like this is incredible, and it's since become one of the most iconic locations in film. Here we see Norma, or rather Norman, for the first time. The Bates home was also modelled after the painting The House by the Railroad by Edward Hopper. Depicting a Victorian home in the middle of nowhere with railroad tracks in front of it, the paintings seem to represent loneliness and isolation. The Museum of Modern Art in New York actually describes the painting like this. The tracks create a visual barrier that seems to block access to the house, which appears moored and isolated in the surrounding empty landscape. Its old-fashioned architecture and lack of any sense of occupancy imply that the house may be a relic of tradition, lonely and forgotten in the push towards urbanization and progress as suggested by the railroad tracks. So, you can see why this was chosen to be the Bates house, as just like in the painting, the house sits isolated from the world with only the mother's window lit up. Preferring to shoot indoors, only shots of the house from a distance were filmed outside, with Hitchcock having a second mansion built on the soundstage with just the front porch. If you've ever visited the house at something like Universal Studios, then you will know it's tiny. However, they used forced perspective to make it seem bigger, and it works brilliantly in the movie. We're then introduced to Norman, who runs out of the house after Marion begins honking her horn. Upon entering the office, the first thing we're met with is Marion in front of a mirror, once again showing that she's entered the dark reverse of her own reality. Norman mentions how no one ever comes to the motel unless they got off the highway by accident. This is just a throwaway line, but it indicates that this is not a place people choose to be. And Norman's introduced as a likable and charming person who stumbles over his words while making small talk with Marion. Not at all threatening. Played by Anthony Perkins, Hitchcock felt that his murderers needed to be charming and attractive in order to subvert the audience. He has to be an attractive man. He's not a murderer in the sense of a fiction murderer where the tendency would be to make him look sinister and you'd also be scared of him. Not a bit. He had to be charming, attractive. If he weren't, he'd never get near one of his victims. At the time, Perkins was a teen heartthrob playing romantic leads, and he even released 3 pop albums. He was marketed by Paramount as their last matinee idol, making him the perfect person to portray Norman. In the book, he's an overweight, middle-aged, balding alcoholic who kind of plays on the stereotype of what a bad guy is expected to be. Norman in the movie is the complete opposite, and the sweet boy next door who audiences at the time would have lowered their guard for. Even most of the marketing and the posters, they showed him gasping and looking scared. It was his role in 1956 Friendly Persuasion which earned him a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor, and this is what gave Hitchcock the idea that he could balance the complexity of Norman's character and make him also seem sympathetic. Perkins' real life also mirrored Norman's in some really strange ways. Perkins' father Osgood Perkins was also an actor, and he sadly died when Anthony was just 5 years old. This is exactly the same age as Norman was when he says his father died in the film. Also, similar to Norman, Perkins had a secret hate for his father and felt tremendous guilt after his death, even referencing the complex that we discussed earlier. I became an anomaly close to my mother. Whenever my father came home, I was jealous. It was the Oedipal thing in pronounced form, which I've probably mispronounced myself. I loved him, but I also wanted him to be dead so I could have her all to myself. Speaking on his feelings of guilt, he went on to say, I was horrified. I assumed that my wanting him to be dead had actually killed him. I prayed and prayed for my father to come back. I remember long nights of crying in bed. For years, I nursed the hope that he wasn't really dead, because I'd seen him on film. It was as if he was still alive. He became a mythic being to me, to be dreaded and appeased. Tony actually related to the character a lot, and this was also due to some weird behavior from his past. Because loving my mother was connected in my mind with killing my father, it became dangerous to love my mother. She was constantly touching me and caressing me, not realizing what effect she was having. She would touch me all over, even stroking the inside of my thighs right up to my crotch. Whoa! However, along with the over-the-line affection, Tony's mother also took complete control of his life. She wasn't ill-tempered or mean, Tony says, just a strong-willed, dominant New England kind of woman. She controlled everything about my life, including my thoughts and feelings. Finish your homework, put away your toys, take a bath now. Where are you going? What are you reading? Why are you doing that? She felt she was taking responsibility, but she was really taking control. Norman even says a line very similar about his own mother in the film when having dinner with Marion. You can see why Perkins was able to portray Norman so convincingly, and it's really eerie how close he was to the actual character. Besides the murder part, it's also well known that Perkins struggled with his sexuality all the way into adulthood. Perkins even wrote some of Norman's dialogue himself to better relate to the character. This made a lot of Norman's lines, particularly in the parlor scene, mirror his real-life feelings towards his relationship with his mother. Perkins was also secretly gay in Hollywood during the 1950s. Obviously, I don't have to go into how society would have viewed him, but if outed, it would have ruined his career. He even gave a nod to this in the film when he says,
We're all in our private traps.
Now, Norman himself was based on Ed Gein, who we've done an in-depth breakdown of on the channel. Gein was told by his mother that all women were harlots and instruments of the devil to lure men into sin. Gein's father also died, which left him and his brother alone to be raised by her. The only time they were allowed to leave their farm was school, and thus they were completely isolated. Ed's brother Henry hated their mother, and he mysteriously died in a fire at the farm after having an argument about her with Ed. Bruises were seen on his head, but ultimately his death was ruled as being asphyxiation. Ed was left alone with his mother, and when she passed away, he was all by himself. But East Warden went missing one day, and police followed the trail back to Ed's. What they found was his home outfitted with bowls made from skulls, noses and fingers for curtain pulls, and skin used as lampshades. It was a true house of horror which revealed Gein's despicable crimes. He said he'd wanted to make a skin suit so he could become his own mother, and ultimately this inspired Psycho. Now, while Marion and Norman are talking at the front desk, we can see the newspaper sticking out of her purse, which sets up how it will be used to hide the money. Thus, the newspaper becomes a new MacGuffin. The newspaper's framed between them during the whole conversation, further leading the audience to believe that Norman will discover the cash. Making the money such an important part of the first act makes us focus on it instead of Norman, and we're only worried about him discovering Marion's secret. We have no idea he's a complete psychopath. This even makes us discount what secrets Norman may have. Marion also signs her name as Marion Samuels. This is both an alias and a subconscious manifestation of her entire motive in stealing the money. Norman puts her in the first cabin next to the office in case she needs anything, but he seems to struggle when choosing the number. We know she's the only person staying, and thus it shouldn't be difficult. However, he's clearly wrestling back and forth with putting her here, as this will inevitably lead to him spying on her. Upon entering the room, he points out the fresh bed sheets and towels. However, when pointing to the bathroom, he abruptly stops, seemingly stumbling over the word bathroom.
And over there.
The bathroom.
Yeah.
After this, he immediately goes to leave. This is a nod to how Norman and or his mother, Norma Bates, will later kill Marion in that same bathroom. It's likely where he's murdered people before, and it's almost like he can't acknowledge the darkness that's in there. We learn at the end of the film that there were 2 of the victims before Marion, which most likely means that cabin 1 is reserved for his victims. This is because he later puts Lyla and Sam in cabin 10, despite the motel being just as empty. He likely sees Sam as a threat and therefore doesn't want to try and attack him. Norman's shift in personality can also stem from him being attracted to Marion and being uncomfortable with being alone in a room with her. He even suggests having dinner in the parlor instead of Marion's room. As he goes to leave, we can see Marion once again standing in front of a mirror with her reflection standing beside her. He also asks if she's going to drive up the road to a local diner. This reflection of Marion, given the context of the conversation, presents her with a choice between herself and her uncanny double. Going to the diner would be her returning to her normal world, but she chooses to stay on the dark side of the Mobius strip with Norman and thus seals her fate. As Norman leaves to get the sandwiches, the psycho theme begins to play again as Marion hides the money. Conditioned to know it plays when something bad's about to happen, we initially think it's because she's hiding the money in a place it's going to be found. However, what it signifies is that she isn't quite safe with Norman. As Marion hides it, we also hear Norman's mother for the first time yelling at him from the house. She berates him from bringing dinner to some strange girl, saying she'll have none of her food or her son. This somewhat plays off a real-life story that Ed Gein told the authorities. He said that he and his mother went to purchase straw from their neighbor, which is when they found him beating his dog to death. A woman came from his house and begged him to stop, and both Ed and his mother quickly left the property. She was apparently distraught, but Ed was shocked it wasn't about the dog being killed. Instead, she was angry that the neighbor had been with a woman he wasn't married to. She called her a harlot, and this further impressed the idea of women being sinful. The voice of Norma Bates was composed of 3 separate actors and made up of Virginia Gregg, Jeanette Nolan, and Paul Jasmine. Virginia Gregg later became the definitive voice of Norma by reprising the role in both Psycho 2 and Psycho 3, which are actually worth watching. And when Norman arrives with the sandwiches, we see his reflection standing beside him in the window, further playing into there being 2 sides to him.
My mother, what is the phrase? She isn't quite herself today.
Obviously, we know in hindsight that Norman's pretending to be his mother, so her not being herself makes more sense on a second watch. Marion invites him into her room to eat the sandwich, and Norman takes a step before stopping himself. Then we get a close-up of his face. This goes back to Hitchcock's method of having emotion convey a character's thoughts instead of dialogue. Upon rewatching, you can see that Norman is most likely hearing his mother's voice in his head, belittling him for his desires. His eyes then shift away from Marion and he looks down at the sandwiches. He then offers for them to eat in the parlor attached to the office, which is where we learn a lot more about Norman. I also want to point out that while Norman doesn't go into Marion's room, he first invites her to the office but then brings her to his parlor located in the back. This is his favourite place, which is filled with his favourite things, showing that he's still given into his desire for Marion in some way. Hitchcock said in The Trail for Psycho that the parlor's where Norman spends most of his time, calling it his hideaway.
This was the son's room, but we won't go in there because his favorite spot was the little parlor behind his office in the motel.
Being a refuge for Norman, the room's full of symbolism and small details, so you better strap yourself in, mate. Upon entering, we see Norman's favourite hobbies, taxidermy, with there being stuffed birds across the wall. This gives a hint to his ability to preserve, which is what's kept his mother's corpse from fully rotting away.
It's more than a hobby.
One of the birds is a huge owl perched in the corner with its wings spread out in flight. This is something Norman later sits directly under, and it could have its own special meaning. Owls have long been associated with being messengers of death, hinting at how Norman will kill Marion. However, Norman's acting as his mother, so he's very much a messenger as well.
You eat like a bird.
Hitchcock likely became obsessed with birds around this time as well, and his next film was, you guessed it, don't need a drum roll, The Birds. When the conversation changes, Marion stands up to leave and we see a bird positioned behind her, almost like it's slowly closing in. The beak itself's almost like a knife aimed right at her neck. I think Hitchcock also likely chose Phoenix as the place she's from because Phoenix is the name of a bird, but that might be a reach. During this, Marion and Norman sit down to eat their sandwiches, but Norman says he isn't hungry. This is another subtle hint that something isn't right, as he said earlier that he was about to have dinner. Which one is it, Norman? This is also why he offered Marion the sandwiches in the first place, so yeah, it's clearly manipulating the situation. Before getting into the dialogue of this scene, I want to first take a moment to point everyone's attention to the paintings scattered across the wall. On the wall to the left of Marion is Titan's Venus with a mirror. This depicts Cupid holding up a mirror to Venus as she poses nude with her left hand covering her boob. Just one boob, not both. This is meant to symbolize Marion representing an idealistic representation of feminine beauty. Norman is Cupid holding up the mirror and revealing what kind of person she is. Ultimately, it's this conversation that makes her turn around and take back the money. Marion also tells Norman he should escape his private trap and finally be his own person. The painting also subtly hints at the ambiguous sexual relationship that Norman has with his mother, which I think is kind of paralleled by the relationship with Cupid and Venus, and how sometimes it's depicted in a sexual nature. Venus is also the goddess of love, whereas Cupid shoots arrows that ignite men's desires. Mars is sometimes depicted as his father, with this being a mix between war and love. This parallels how Norman has his loving and kind side that's also mirrored with his vengeful and angry one. The Bates home even has a statue of Cupid at the bottom of the stairs when we walk into the house, possibly playing this up. Sitting across from each other, you might also notice that all the frames behind Marion have rounded edges, whereas the ones behind Norman have sharp and hard ones. This again creates the idea of juxtaposition and a harsh side opposed by a more tender one. Norman also mentions that he chooses birds because he can't stand the sight of beasts. He just stuffs birds, and it also explains why he chooses this woman who eats like a bird as his next victim. As Norman leans back, we also see a shadow on the wall behind him, which is another nod to his double side. Norman then talks about the private traps, and this monologue helps the audience to sympathize with him. This has us seeing him as a sheltered man wanting to escape under the overbearing control of his mother. Also, when he admits to pretending to not mind the trap he's in, Norman's eyes quickly shift towards the window. That's where the house is located and where his mother watches over him. Marion says that she couldn't imagine letting someone talk to her the way that Norman's mother does, and he further admits that sometimes he wants to curse her and leave her forever. However, he knows he can't. As Norman leans forward, the Venus is also positioned to his left, but as he leans back, it reveals another portrait which becomes essential to the film. This painting is known as Susanna and the Elders by William Van Meers. This originates from a story in the Bible where a beautiful married woman bathes in her garden as two elders of the community secretly watch her. Basically about voyeurism. There are numerous versions of the Susanna that depict the scene differently, with some having the elders simply observing her. However, this version shows them after they've approached her and are violently pulling at her. When revealing the Susanna along with the Venus, it shows how the beautiful and serene image of Venus admiring herself progresses into the brutal assault of Susanna. This plays into how Norman's admiration of her beauty will become violent. Both Susanna and Venus foreshadow how Marion will meet her end, with her even striking a nearly identical pose to Susanna when she gets stabbed in the shower. We also learn later that the Susanna painting hides Norman's peephole, which he uses to spy on Marion. This furthers the voyeuristic connection of Norman going from an onlooker into a violent participant, exactly like the elders. Norman then says that his mother's ill. He then tells his story about how his father died and how his mother was left to raise him on her own. This stuff is all explored in the sequels and prequels, which basically fill in this past. Again, I actually think they're worth checking out, but obviously, none of them really live up to this. And a lot of people don't even know there's sequels. Now, Norma later met another man who convinced her to build a motel, and after he died, it was too much for her to bear. So she lost it. This backstory is fleshed out more in the end, but Hitchcock giving us this information, it further points us away from Norman and more towards his mother. Marion asks why he doesn't leave, and he jokes that he should go to a private island like her. Marion says that he shouldn't, and we see her cross her left arm over her body in almost a defensive posture. Kind of also similar to how Venus is depicted with her arm wrapped around her body. Norman emphasizes that he doesn't hate his mother, but he hates what she's become. And that is basically the darker side to himself. The conversation then takes a dark turn when Marion suggests he should put his mother in a home, which Norman definitely does not like.
You mean an institution? A madhouse? People always call a madhouse someplace, don't they? Put her in someplace.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to sound uncaring.
What do you know about caring? Have you ever seen the inside of one of those places? The laughing and the tears, and the cruel eyes studying you. My mother there?
In hindsight, it's clear Norman's been in the home just like what he's describing, and it's sadly where he gets left at the end. Everyone's staring at him and examining him, and he retreats into his mother because he's in his own personal hell. He assures Marion that she's harmless though, and no more dangerous than his stuffed birds. Referencing again how her body's been preserved by Norman, and yeah, she's just a stuffed corpse. Come the end of the film, his mother's voice rattles off about how she wouldn't harm a fly, and he's trying to reassure this notion into others. Norman gets increasingly agitated talking about people's opinions and advice until he calms down a bit and says he doesn't like to think about it and that she needs me.
She needs me.
Seems that Perkins put a bit of extra emphasis on the word me, which could be another way he's telling the audience that he and his mother are the same person. Right now, Norma literally needs Norman in order to exist, so she needs me carries an extra meaning. He then says that she's not a maniac, but just goes a little mad sometimes, and we get that line, we all go a little mad sometimes. You do kind of think initially that it's talking about Marion and stealing the money, but watching the scene back and knowing the twist, it's a chilling prophecy of what's to come. However, again, looking at it in the mind state of someone in the 60s, this scene could be interpreted as the line referencing Marion and her moment of madness in stealing the money. This is what makes her realize she has to go back. Relating to Norman and his feelings of being trapped, Marion realizes that she must return the money. She says she's pulling herself out her private trap, however, Marion slips up and forgets her alias. She tells Norman her last name of Crane. Crane is of course a bird as well, and with her heading back to Phoenix, maybe it's not a reach. Norman then steps out and we see the giant bird shadow now looming behind him. Norman checks the login book to make sure he's not mistaken, and he realizes that Marion's running from something. Thus her disappearance won't arouse much suspicion. Norman goes back to the parlor as he goes over this information in his mind, and we get a second Susanna painting on the wall opposite the Venus in the first Susanna. This is a different version, seemingly resembling the one by Anthony Van Dyck. It also depicts a violent scene of the elders assaulting Susanna and will of course come back into play later on. The camera fixes on Norman's face as he walks through the parlor and we can see the wheels turning in his head with this new information. He then spies on Marion in the next room. We get his eye up to the peephole and it's such an iconic shot. Hitchcock used a 50mm lens on a 35mm camera. This apparently gives the closest approximation to human vision, and it puts the audience in the perspective of Norman and implicates them as fellow voyeurs. Norman then puts the painting back and he looks over his shoulder at the window that looks out from the house. He then looks at the ground, further contemplating the situation. Norman then leaves the parlor and pauses for another moment to look over at the Bates home and his mother's illuminated window before heading up to the house. He then begins to go upstairs to his mother's room before stopping himself and sulking in the kitchen. He's framed in the doorway, which creates a box around him and paints him as being once more in this trap. His mother then takes over, whereas he's relegated to being here. Phew, I know that was a lot to break down for one scene, but it really shows just how meticulous Hitchcock was with every detail and camera angle in order to pull the audience in and cement them in the dark world he'd created. While everyone remembers the shower scene that's coming up in just a bit, I think this is the best scene in the film, both from a performance perspective, but also its overall meaning to the plot. Both Perkins and Lee convey so much emotion in their eyes, with Hitchcock perfectly executing his mastery over visual storytelling. Along with the dialogue, it subliminally plants information and a certain feeling in the mind of the viewer. Back in her room, Marion then goes over the remainder of the money minus the $700 for the car. She then throws his bit of paper in the toilet and flushes it away. Whoa! Stop the press, mate! You cannot do that! So yeah, strange detail here, but this was actually the first movie to feature a toilet flushing.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Yes, seriously. This fact has been contested as the 1930 film Gone Wild featured a toilet and you can hear the toilet flush. There though, the camera didn't focus in on the actual flush. So it was we're going crazy, you censors, get in here quick, we can't show this. Yeah, entertainment in the 1950s, you know, it was all under the Hays Code and they pretty much refused to allow anything like this to be shown. You had to keep up the wholesome domestic life of the 50s. This meant no nudity, premarital sex or violence, and criminals always had to be punished. Always! This also included toilets, as it was seen as inappropriate. Psycho screenwriter Joseph Stefano, though, he was adamant about the audience actually seeing the toilet flush to convey realism. This was something gritty for the movie that would make it feel authentic. Hitchcock agreed, but he said he would only let it happen if he could make it happen with his writing. So this entire scene was made just for the toilet flush, which is pretty creative. Fuck you, William Hayes. Fuck you, Ryan Airy, you fucker. The whole concept of the movie with Marion and Norman's worlds being dark reflections of each other, though, was a stark contrast to the 50s ideal of domestic life being a safe haven from a corrupt and threatening outside world. Hitchcock and Stefano actually devised multiple clever ways to avoid censorship by the Hays Code to make Psycho still portray violence, which we'll get into in just a bit. We'll do it right now.
We'll do it live! Fuck it!
Okay, so Marion undresses and gets in the shower, but notice how the score stops playing. This makes the scene silent and indicates to the audience that Marion's safe after disposing of the evidence. Here we see her ego finally overcome her id, and she's no longer her uncanny double. This is further pointed to as this is one of the only scenes with Marion that doesn't include a mirror. Marion smiles with joy as she showers, which I feel also represents her shedding her double. She is washing away the darkness before returning to the day and also her normal life. However, the camera then cuts to a wide angle and we see the silhouette of Norma slowly walking towards the curtain. This is such a massive moment, but pan and scan hid it for so long. You see, kids, back in the day, not many people had widescreen TVs, so everything was cut to fit a box. Therefore, audiences missed this out. It's such a terrifying moment though, and we then see as the quote-unquote Norman attacks. I think when we look at cinema history, then this is probably up there as the most iconic death in a horror movie. Before going into why this scene's so memorable though, I just want to point out that when we see Norma, we can just barely see her eyes while the rest of her is covered in shadow. I think this is a really cool subtle detail that lets your mind kind of make up what her face looks like, and it further points us away from Norman. This actually wasn't Tony Perkins either, and they used a body double while he was in New York shooting a play. It's also a great representation of the shadow self taking over and the vengeance she's been running from finally coming to claim her. Norma brutally stabs Marion, and while she's being killed, she strikes multiple poses similar to the Susanna and Venus paintings, furthering the connection of her representing feminine beauty, which can rarely exist in peace under the male gaze, according to art. This infamous scene took a 78-shot setup and a week to film. Though it lasts just 45 seconds, so much work went into it. They actually shot for 3 weeks on the picture, so this was a third of her time on the production. They built walls so that they could be removed and the camera could get every angle of the murder. The Psycho theme's the same, but is intensified by loud shrieking sounds, which Herman created to coincide with the stabs of the knife. He had violinists play the same note over and over again and called it a return to pure ice water, which is a fucking cool name. Hitchcock originally didn't want any music in the scene at all, but he then became convinced after seeing a cut with a score in, which was a great decision. The rapid editing here is also a major thing. You watch old movies like this and you'll see long takes with barely any cuts. This is rapid, cut, and it would have shocked people at the time. Though the knife never actually penetrates her skin, many people walked out saying they'd seen the stabbing. And yeah, it kind of shows how effective the edit was. It showed how montage could create an effect without showing anything. This was another clever way that Hitchcock avoided censorship by the Hays Code, but still conveyed the brutality of the murder. There is one shot that does appear to break her skin, but this was done by putting blood on the tip of the knife, pressing it against the actor's stomach, and then shooting it in reverse and pulling it away and reversing the, you know what I mean. Hitchcock also implemented a few different camera techniques that were not common at the time but have since become iconic. In order to make the scene feel chaotic, Hitchcock and Psycho editor George Tomasini also implemented 180-degree shifts in the camera's viewpoint.
There's an invisible line between two forces that exist from one person to the other. And when you're shooting a scene, you stay on one side of that line, you know, or the other side of that line, okay? I don't like crossing the line because it confuses the viewer. If you cross from one side of shooting the line to the other side, the audience goes, well, wait, where are they looking? I'm not saying never, because there are times when you have to cross the line.
Talking about the scene, one of the film's editors, John Benson, commented on how Tomasini removed around 4 to 5 frames to give the impression that Marion was being slammed against the wall. Looking back, this was also probably the most violent thing audiences had seen on screen at the time. The censors tried to catch Hitchcock with this shot, but he reportedly told them, No, you didn't see this. You thought you did, but you didn't. I didn't do the things you told me not to do. I was a good boy. Also, this wasn't actually Janet Leigh for most of it, but it was in fact Marley Renfro who was used as a body double. Leigh said it was her for years and years, but eventually admitted that wasn't the case. There were rumours as well that Renfro got murdered in real life, but these have been debunked as she was found alive in 2017. One detail I love is that Norman's also always left-handed, whereas Norma's right, showing which side of his brain's in control at the time. They also used chocolate sauce instead of blood as it showed up better on the camera, and kinda got around the censors. There's a lot more we could talk about in how they created this scene, but we still have nearly half the movie to go. I will, however, direct you to a great documentary called 78/52 by Alexandre O'Philippe. This breaks down the scene shot for shot and includes some big names in horror like Guillermo del Toro and also Jamie Lee Curtis. Wonder how they got her. Janet then grasps the curtain, giving us a fleeting moment of hope that she'll survive before falling dead like a sack of bricks. We then follow the trail of blood circling down the drain and fade into Marion's dead eyes. This took 26 takes in order to get it right, but Hitchcock missed an important detail of Marion's eyes not being dilated, which apparently happens at the moment of death. Ophthalmologists, they then wrote to Hitchcock and suggested he uses belladonna drops to dilate the eyes, which is what he did for all his following films. They actually inhaled in this moment as well, and apparently you could see her neck pulsing, which was pointed out by Hitchcock's wife Alma. This was just before the film was due to be distributed, so they put in a quick cut of the shower head, which completely covered it up. We then track from Marion's body and close in on the newspaper containing the money. We then track away to the Bates mansion, where Norman screams,
Mother! Oh, God! Mother! Blood! Blood!
Norman's voice does sound a bit different here, and that's because Hitchcock had the sound engineers remove the bass tones of Perkins' voice. This was done to make him sound like a scared teenage boy. I really love the setup of this shot as well. By focusing on the money and then tracking to the house, it subtly implants the idea that Norman will take the money to escape from his murderous mother, further subverting us to the idea that Norman's the killer himself. Norman then rushes to the motel while the music kicks in and he knocks down a picture of a bird. There's also one on the wall behind him. After putting it back up, we get a better look at these two pictures and can see that they're facing opposite directions. This again symbolizes how Marion and Norman are reflections of one another. They're both birds, but Norman knocking down one plays into the fact that he's just killed Marion, which was of course by his hand in both instances. It's really impressive how Perkins was able to not tip his hat to Norman being the murderer, and this reaction really cements a later reveal that he's unaware of what he's doing. Norman then leaves the room, but not before making sure we see the money directly behind him, further pointing at him taking it. We then watch as Norman covers up his mother's crimes and goes to grab a mop. One thing I want to point out as well is that Norman walks to the bathroom and passes by a mirror, but we don't see his reflection. Knowing that nothing in this movie is done by accident, I think this further plays into using mirrors to reflect the uncanny as Norman has fully succumbed to his double. We also don't see the mirror in the bathroom, despite deliberately focusing on Norman as he washes Marion's blood off his hands. This plays off how Hitchcock just applied the same trick with Marion to signify her shedding her dark double. Norman then grabs Marion's brand new car and stuffs her body in it along with the money. No, not the money!
Hello, I like money.
This is Hitchcock basically telling you straight up, that money and Marion plot is over. We are over now. We're in a different movie. I feel like if this was a TV show, which was one of the plans that they were thinking about doing to adapt the novel, that this moment would have been the end of the first night. We then as the audience would have just left the night shouting at the screen, just open the newspaper! But again, this is done to tell us it's over. Forget about the money is not important anymore. This is the moment the film completely shifts into Norman's perspective, and it follows the same three-step process of suspense that Hitchcock used with Marion. Firstly, plant a secret, which in this case is the murder. We then have the close calls, which happens when Norman finishes his cleanup. He gets startled by headlights passing on the road, and we also have the investigation. We then have the final twist, and whereas Marion got murdered as that being the twist, Norman's twist is the whole mother thing that's widely known. This parallel instantly makes the audience root for Norman though, as he's now taken Marion's place as the main character. Norman then drives off just as the sun's about to rise, and this is the exact same time Marion said that she would be leaving. However, he takes the car to a nearby swamp to dump it. Norman pushes the car into it, which is when it gets stuck for a moment before sinking. This moment of it stopping reportedly caused audiences to gasp and then let out a huge sigh of relief when the car became completely submerged. Hitchcock later said this was the moment he knew he had them. Now try and pretend for a moment again that you don't know the twist. Nothing thus far has shown Norman to be anything other than a strange but sweet guy who's trapped by his overbearing and now murderous mother. Since Norman's introduction, everything's worked to make us sympathize with him and ultimately become complicit in his crimes. We want the car to go beneath the water so Norman isn't blamed for the murder. We feel uncomfortable when he's later questioned by the police and Sam, and just like Marion, we as the audience have travelled far enough on our safe side of the Mobius strip and into the uncanny flip side of Norman's world, which is incredible storytelling. Though I keep harping on about the money, the fact we don't need it at this point to feel attached to the characters is expert storytelling. We then fade away and back to the real world, where we find Sam writing a letter to Marion about how he doesn't care if they're poor and miserable as long as they hit the thumbs up and have each other. We then pan back through the hardware store as an old woman asks a question about insect poison. She's irritating and annoying and clearly building off the villainy with Norman's mother. What have you got against old women? We then are introduced to Marion's sister Lyla. She's now worried about Marion never returning home after work on Friday. I also want to point out the display of knives hung up on the wall to the left of the screen. It's a pretty intricate display, and at one point, it's like they're framed right over the old lady's head. This is a subtle nod to the murder being committed by Norma, and further putting us off the trail of Norman. Lyla then questions Sam about Marion and thinks that they stole the money together. It's at this point that we're introduced to another quote-unquote voyeur who's been watching them through the window. This is Milton Arbogast, who's a private investigator hired by Marion's boss to find the money. Another detail here with the knives on the wall is that as Arbogast leans back on the desk, he frames himself below them. This somewhat foreshadows how he'll later be stabbed by Norman while he falls back on the stairs. Arbogast then questions both them about the money, and he's convinced that Marion is still somewhere in town. Also, according to IMDb trivia, throughout the scene, Lyla gets framed with rakes behind her to give the impression that hands are coming out and grabbing her. The theme also kicks in again as Arbogast goes from hotel to hotel, foreshadowing the danger that he'll soon find himself in. When Arbogast arrives at the motel, he then meets Norman sitting on the porch. He gives him the same speech he gave Marion about forgetting to turn the sign lights on, and there being 12 rooms and also 12 vacancies. I did wonder if all this is potentially to draw victims in and make it so that whoever turns up is probably going to be the only guests. If the place was hustling and bustling and busy, it would be near impossible for Norman to kill. Norman then invites Arbogast into the office, where he begins questioning him about Marion. Now, there's two things to mention in this scene. We see the back of Arbogast's reflection in the mirror, but never facing it. This further points at him being a decent guy and not his uncanny dark half. We also see another painting of the Susanna to the left of Norman in his office as he's questioning about Marion's disappearance. However, this is a different version of the Susanna than the one Norman uses to hide his secret peephole. This version seems to be similar to the Anthony Van Dyke depiction of the scene, which also takes a more violent interpretation. The second Susanna pops up a few different times and even moves locations later in the film. It's seen on the wall of the office when Norman's confronted by Sam, showing how the murder continuously haunts him. We then get another close call when Arbogast catches Norman in multiple lies when questioning him about Marion. The alias in the register seals his fate and confirms his suspicions. We get lots of close-ups on Norman's face, showing him getting increasingly nervous, but his face totally shifts when Arbogast asks if he spent the night with her. Norman's sexual desires for Marion are what caused his mother's personality to take over, who would never allow her son to be with any woman. It seems here he's reacting not only to Arbogast's accusations, but to his mother's voice in his head. There's also an interesting shot of Norman leaning his head over while pretending to be confused by seeing Marion's name. It might be a reach, but I think this is to further play into the bird theme that we see throughout the movie. Maybe it's Hitchcock doing an Inception and implanting the idea that birds are scary.
He's a bird!
Cause yeah, the birds is his next film. Or maybe it's a reach. Might not be anything, but the shot's just weird and kind of shows how weird that Norman is. The way Norman stumbles over his story and trails off in his thoughts also seems to be similar to a child who's coming up with a lie. It represents how mentally he's also childlike. His stutter goes next level, and it's clear when he feels pressure that he shuts down and his mother takes over. As Arbogast walks out the office, he then goes around the corner to see the ominous Bates home. The mother's standing in the window, and it's the exact same thing Marion saw when she first got to the motel. This perfectly parallels how Arbogast is about to meet the same fate as Marion, and is such a creepy moment.
Is anyone at home?
No.
Oh, there's somebody sitting up in the window.
No, there isn't.
Oh, sure, go ahead, take a look.
Oh, that must be my mother. She's an invalid. It's practically like living alone.
Oh, I see.
Arbogast then catches Norman in another lie about his mother and further suspects that he is hiding Marion. He then insists on talking to his mother. Norman also gets visibly agitated for the first time when Arbogast asks if Marion played him for a fool, to which Norman firmly asserts,
"But I'm not a fool.
Well,
and I'm not capable of being fooled, not even by a woman."
This feels like another instance of Norman trying to defend himself against both Arbogast and his mother, who throws the same accusations at him of women fooling him with their sexuality. This could also be Norma herself taking over Norman for a moment, as it's the first time he raises his voice. I personally believe that whenever people hear Norman's mother throughout the movie, they're actually just hearing Norman putting on a voice. Obviously, he can't make his voice sound like his mother's, so I think that we're kind of seeing things purely from his perspective. However, Arbogast here is seeing his mother, but it is sounding like Norman. Now this seems further hinted at by Norman's next line saying that Marion may have fooled him, but she didn't fool his mother. Almost as if Norma's gloating about the fact that she killed Marion for trying to seduce her son. Once Arbogast asks to talk to Norma, Norman quickly cuts the conversation and tells him to leave. Norman then smiles and laughs to himself as Arbogast drives away. I've fooled you, I've tricked him. I feel like this further plays into Norman's childlike nature, as he's obviously just made Arbogast even more suspicious. But since he's left, he thinks it's all good, it's all gravy, we got away with another one.
What an imbecile.
Arbogast then calls Lyla to tell her about his lead and that he's going back to the Bates Motel to talk to Norman's mother. He says he still feels like something's not right. Yeah, no shit, mate. As Arbogast pulls up, Norman sees him and quickly heads towards the house before Arbogast arrives. I think Arbogast is quite a funny character because he's both a good PI and also a shit one. He's really good at interrogating Norman, but doesn't really put the obvious dots together. And then here he just misses him despite him walking almost right in front of him. Arbogast then looks about for Norman in his office, but is only met by his stuffed birds. They watch on and judge, much like how Norma's stuffed corpse watches out from the window. We also see the same one that was just behind Marion before she was murdered. This is a black crow, which is often used as an omen of death. And yet, Arbogast doesn't have long for this world. As Arbogast leaves the parlor, we then see a second Venus painting to his right. It's hard to make out what specific painting this is, but you can see Venus front and center with the three graces to her right. This is most likely a version of Botticelli's Primavera, which is one of the most famous paintings from the Italian Renaissance. In Greek mythology, the three graces are the three daughters of Zeus, Agaia, Euphrosyne, and Talia. Together, they personify beauty and grace, and though it's only on screen for a second, I think this version of the Venus is meant to represent Norman's victims. We learn at the end of the film that there were two other girls who went missing in the area before Marion, who are represented by the three graces. Venus, however, now represents Marion's sister Lyla. She's replaced Marion not only as the main character, but also as Norman's next potential victim. After Arbogast, the three graces can also be seen in the clock next to the stuffed crow earlier in the film when Marion first enters the parlor. This is the only time in the film we see this painting, and I think that's intentional, as it's meant to symbolize Arbogast looking for victims as they loom right over him. Leaving the office, Arbogast then makes his way to the Bates home. As we creep up to the house, we quickly scan over the room from Arbogast's point of view and get a few more interesting details. Firstly, we see another painting at the top of the stairs with a woman's arms stretched out like Marion's were when she was murdered. This is a painting by Arbogast titled Spring, with the artist's focus being on elevating the form of feminine beauty at the end of the 19th century. We then see the statue of Cupid at the foot of the stairs, which, as mentioned before, is meant to symbolize Norman and his weird relationship with his mother. The statue also has the baby pointing the arrow right at Arbogast further pointing to his murder. Arbogast slowly walks up the stairs with a quiet score until blasting the psycho theme as Norma comes out her room. Brandishing a knife, she walks straight towards him and slashes him across the face. I absolutely love the quick pace and top-down shot as Norman walks across the landing, and it happens so fast and out of nowhere, you're completely shocked. It's just perfect. However, what this does is also hide the twist it's Norman. Before he was shot in shadow, which you couldn't really do again. By making this shot from above, we don't suspect that there's any secret of who the murderer is, as we've already been told that it's Norman's mother. However, the speed that the figure moves at also makes it clear it isn't an old woman, but we're just too shocked to notice. Sends him tumbling down the stairs, but unlike with Marion, we don't cut away. What I love is that it's the complete opposite to Marion's death. Whereas that was lots of rapid quick cuts, this lingers. Norma chases after him and continues to stab him until we fade back to Sam's shop. Back with them, they decide to take the investigation into their own hands as Arbogast hasn't returned, and I think it's around this time the movie does start to drag a bit. Now, it's a masterpiece, mate, a pièce de résistance, a tour de force, but even Hitchcock admitted they could have trimmed 10 minutes off the picture. So take it up with him.
Take it up with the complaints department. Zing!
I am going to write them such a letter.
Sadly, there was also lots of tension on set around this part. Hitchcock was famous for falling in love with his leading ladies, and the first half is very much about following Marion and being seduced by her. Lyla is shot in the complete opposite way, and this is because Hitchcock had grown to dislike Vera Miles. The Now Playing podcast goes into all the history, and they talk about how she'd been groomed to be his next star. However, Vera had committed the sin of getting pregnant on Vertigo, which didn't sit well with the director. She was contracted to do one more film for him, but he ended up snubbing her and refused to talk to her on set. Which, yeah, mental, but the movie doesn't really feel like it serves her at all, despite her being such a major part of it. John Gavin was also signed as James Bond for Diamonds Are Forever, and if you want to hear more about that, then there's a breakdown on the channel now. Sam then heads to the motel where he finds Norman looking over the swamp.
Don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious.
You completely get what's happened and know he's just dumped the car and body. Sam calls out for the detective, and we cut to Norman pondering how he might have to claim another victim. I think first watch though, you're kind of sympathetic for him as you think he's covering for the murderer. You want him to escape his mother's control, and on a second watch, this is in more ways than one. We then cut to Lyla at the shop, but they superimpose his face over her with the fade-in. This highlights how she'll be the next one on Norma's hit list. Sam returns to the shop, and we get a shot of Lyla running towards the camera to meet him at the door. She's completely covered in shadow, making her just a silhouette, even when getting right up to the camera. I'm really not sure what this means, but it has to be intentional. I feel like it was her approaching the darkness and almost becoming enveloped in Norman's world. Sam tells Lyla that he didn't find shit, but he saw Norma in the house, however, she wouldn't answer the door. With nothing else to go on, they decide to take the information to the local sheriff. Waking him out of bed, they tell him about Marion, the money, and also the strange things going on at that creepy Bates Motel. Being from the area, the sheriff and his wife are both familiar with Norman, and they just see him as being a harmless hermit. The sheriff also mentions that he doesn't really get out due to some bad business that happened 10 years ago. After calling him and believing his story, we then get the bombshell that Norma's been dead for 10 years. The sheriff's wife even comments on how she helped Norman pick out her dress for a funeral, which was periwinkle blue, which I know is in black and white in the movie, but I'm pretty sure when her body's revealed at the end, she's rocking something like I am right now, and it deserves a thumbs up. It's very akin to Ed Gein though, who also used to dig up graves and then take the bodies for his own gain. The sheriff then tells them how Norma poisoned the man she was seeing and then took her own life. So we obviously know that this isn't true, but I think it's a pretty believable story to make us assume that Norma and Norman faked her death in order to cover up the murder of her lover. I don't know if I'm gonna cover the sequels in general, but yeah, they discuss it a lot there and I keep harping on about them and you should watch them. I think this also hints at the reveal as well, with the story basically being Romeo and Juliet. It's obviously, the most famous love tragedy of all time. Considering Norman's more childlike mental state, I feel this would be the kind of story a kid would make up as a lie. It's not too elaborate and a little on the nose about being a story of doomed lovers. Back at the Bates Motel, Norman sits in his parlor after getting off the phone with the sheriff. We can again see his shadow reflecting behind him as well as the second Susanna. showing how both his dark double and the murderer are following him. Norman then walks into the house and tells his mother that she has to hide in the fruit cellar in case the police come to investigate. Despite her protest, he carries her down the stairs himself, which is weird because she's been running around the whole movie stabbing people. This is when Hitchcock begins to slowly show his hand though and prepare us for the big reveal. Here, there are multiple things pointing to Norman and his mother being the same person. Firstly, notice how Norman walks up the stairs when he first enters the house. Perkins swings his hips in a very feminine manner as he walks to his mother's room, which was intentional to subtly suggest his dual personality. Also, when talking to his mother, Norman says that he has something to bring up, and his mother starts screaming about how she's not going down into the cellar.
Please, Mother.
No, I will not hide in the fruit cellar.
This is before Norman's even mentioned the cellar, showing that she already knows what he's going to say because they share the same mind. You can also see her foot hit the banister of the staircase, and it's just limp like a fish. The camera also focuses on the doorway during the entire conversation until panning to the same overhead shot of the stairs that we saw when Arbogast was killed. This shot was actually achieved by taking the entire roof off the set. The cameraman was then able to fit into a compact space to be able to turn and move to the proper angles. Hitchcock created this elaborate shot in order to further hide the reveal of Norma being dead, much like how the knife wielder was hidden before. I think a really great recent example of this technique can be seen in the final episode of Severance Season 1. There, we learned something about a character's wife and realised she's been in the show all along. While she's mentioned multiple times throughout the season, we're so focused on Mark and what's going on in Lumen that most never even thought about how they never showed what she looked like, which is what made it so effective, just like it is here. I also want to point out the structure of the Bates house as well. The 3 floors are another reference to Freud's 3 levels of subconscious. The top floor symbolises Norman's superego, where his controlling mother lives. The main floor represents Norman's ego, where he tries to function and adhere to the demands of reality while hiding the demands of the id, or his dark impulses. We can see an example of this when Norman first enters the house after his dinner with Marion. There he stops himself from going upstairs and instead sits in the kitchen on the main floor. This shows how Norman's ego's fighting to hold back his id from taking over. Finally, we have the basement, symbolizing Norman's id, where he keeps his dark secrets hidden from the world. Now, with Norman's dirty secret hidden away, Sam and Lyla meet the sheriff at the church the next day. He tells them that they went to the Bates house but found nothing suspicious. About as useful as the Gotham Police Department these guys are, the shit.
Now I got you on assaulting an officer.
Got me on assaulting a Drake.
Lyla still isn't satisfied though, and her and Sam decide to check out the motel themselves. Posing as husband and wife, Sam and Lyla arrive at the motel. Norman watches them from his mother's window, which is another hint at them being the same person. We've only seen Norma in the window up until now, so this is another step to the reveal. Norman comes down to greet them, but it's drastically different to how he greeted Marion and Arbogast. Rather than giving his usual 12-room, 12-vacancy speech, he's just kind of gleeful in the madness and asks them, "What the hell do you want?" He also skips over to the office with his hands in his pockets in a playful kind of way. I think this is the moment Norman's given up his charming ruse, and he knows these people are here because of all the strange disappearances. When in the office, we see both Sam and Lyla's reflection in the mirror, showing how they've now entered the uncanny side of Norman's world. Norman immediately tries to put them in cabin 10, far away from where Marion was murdered and also his office. Sam, however, insists he needs a receipt. This is so he can see both the register and make sure there's documentation of them being there. Smart move, Sammy. We also get a funny scene of Sam saying how every other hotel charges people who don't have bags, and then Norman says $10 and smiles to himself as if he's just fooled Sam out of his money.
First time I've ever seen it happen. You check in any other place in this country without bags and you have to pay in advance.
$10.
I just think it's funny how Norman responds here, and I think it also plays into the childlike mental state caused by his superego. Thinking that Norman stole the $40,000 to save his business, Lyla and Sam sneak into Marion's room and then find some evidence. Sam notices the shower curtains missing, and Lyla finds a piece of paper that didn't make it to the toilet. Which we all saw the flush. Fuck you, Hays Code. Fuck you, Ryan Airy.
Shut the f*** up, Ryan Airy.
Now having concrete evidence of Marion and the money, Lyla decides to make her way to the house. She's gonna go up and confront Norma while Sam distracts Norman. Another funny moment here is when Lyla says,
I can handle a sick old woman.
Like, is she fully ready to go and beat up an old lady? Is that what she's talking about? As Lyla approaches the house, I also really like how the camera cuts back and forth from a close-up on her face and then to the front door. Makes it feel like Norma will pop out at any second. We also focus on the door closing behind her, seemingly sealing her fate inside the Bates house. We then return to Sam talking Norman's ear off in the office. Lyla then reaches Norma's room and we see everything's purposely placed with almost nothing being touched. This includes a full bar of soap on the counter next to the sink. We also see that Norma has a giant statue of Venus in her room as well to go along with the Cupid at the bottom of the stairs. We also see another Cupid above the fireplace and pictures of what are most likely Norma and also Norman's father. Now I couldn't find an exact match to the statue, but this one is close minus the harp and lion. Lyla then makes her way across to Norma's bed, which still has the imprint of her body on it. Like The Simpsons or something. I gotta say, like, whether she was dead or alive, how much did Norma weigh? She's really left that big of an impression on the bed, has she? There's no way she can be that heavy, so I do kind of feel like Norman's been lying in her place. We also see Norma's desk with various perfumes and other girly little things, which is most likely where Norman gets ready when turning into Norma. But I want to bring our attention to the weird hand thing on the desk. We know by now that Hitchcock was very particular about every object shown in a scene, and hands are often used to show anxiety or shock. Here they represent Lyla's anxieties about what she'll find in the room, and then her later shock of finding Norma in the cellar. We even jump to a focus on the hands as Lyla inspects them, and she gets scared seeing her reflection in the mirror. This is also immediately playing off the shock part of the hand symbolism. Being scared by her reflection brings us back to the uncanny double and the contrast between her and Marion. While Marion looked directly at her double and accepted it, Lyla's frightened by the sight of hers. Lyla then makes her way to Norman's room, which also looks perfectly preserved from when he was a child. We also see another stuffed owl and a doll hanging on the shelf to the right. These, along with the freaky bunny we see in a moment, all play into the childhood darkness of Norman's world. They are of course familiar kids' toys, but twisted to elicit a feeling of uneasiness. We also see his bed is super small, just like a child's, playing into how he may have left the impression. As Lyla continues around the room, we then focus on a record of Beethoven's Eroica, or Erotica if you're British. Now this represents Norman's dark sexual desires for women. Composed in 1803, the composition was seen as being groundbreaking in symphonic form. It's built around lots of emotional and cultural content, which I think retroactively represents Psycho itself. That piece and this movie innovated the way people experienced and made films forever. We then quickly meet back up with Norman, who's growing increasingly agitated by Sam's aggressive questioning. Sam begins asking Norman about the money, and Norman tells him to shut up and leave. He then retreats back to his parlor, which is where he feels safe. Sam follows him in though, haunting him much like his mother. Norman then realizes that Lyla isn't around and sees that he's being fooled. Sam tries to stop Norman from leaving, but Norman hits him over the head with a vase and then rushes to the house. Lyla sees this and hides down the stairs of the cellar, which is when he goes upstairs. He glances towards the cellar stairs first though, almost like he spotted her. I think it's at this moment that Norman switches over to the Norma personality as he decides to go upstairs and change into her clothes. Lyla then makes her way into the cellar to find Norma sitting there facing the wall. However, when Lyla approaches her, she turns around to reveal that she's just a corpse. Ugh! I know that we've already spoiled this throughout the video, but this reveal shocked everyone at the time. It's an absolutely iconic image and one of the most memorable moments in horror. Though it's a corpse, the way it's lit and spins gives the feeling it's somewhat alive. We've already talked about most of the hints leading up to Norma being dead, but I want to point out their names are also clues as well. Author of Psycho Robert Bloch made their names similar to hint at this reveal. The killer is Norman and the mother is Norma. That of course also plays into gender, and apparently on the set, Hitchcock referred to Perkins as Master Bates, with that name also alluding to the sexual undertones. Lyla then lets out a scream, much like Marion's when she was first confronted by Norma. This was actually also kind of mirrored in real life. Hitchcock left the corpse dummy in Janet Leigh's dressing room and stood outside waiting for her to see it. She basically screamed the house down, and yeah, Hitchcock said this moment, "He knew it was a great scare." Norman then rushes into the room dressed in her clothes with a huge smile on his face, biting his tongue. Not only does he look completely insane, but I feel like Perkins also leans into the more childlike mental state of Norman, as it's a face that feels like the kind of thing a kid would make. Norman then screams, "I'm Norma Bates," while rushing at Lyla with the knife, which is a detail I didn't notice until now. Sam then arrives to save the day, and as the light swings back and forth, we get this unforgettable ending. Well, where we should have ended, if you ask me. You see, back in the day, we didn't have ending explainer, as it wasn't an amazing job role like that knocking about, so it was rare that movies ended ambiguously. There was the fear in the studios that they had to over-explain everything, and that you had to leave the movie with either a happy ending or knowing what was going on. There was kind of a need for answers, and yeah, that's pretty much what we get. In a much smoother and slicker way than I'll ever do it. The guy's doing this, he's like, and Norman did that, which is excellent, but yeah, we're going to go to that explanation now. Okay, so we fade away to the courthouse where we get a lengthy explanation from a psychiatrist of all the events that just occurred. He explains that Norman's mind's been split into two distinct personalities of himself and his mother, with the mother personality now completely taking over. The psychiatrist explains that Norman was already disturbed from his father's death, and that Norma was clingy and a demanding woman who sheltered Norman from the world, which is very similar to what happened with Geen. When Norma met her new boyfriend, Norman became jealous and killed them both, but he was unable to accept what he'd just done. This then manifested Norma's personality into his mind, and he stole her corpse from the cemetery, which is when he stuffed her body. He began dressing in her clothes and walking around the house, fully living as Norma. Psychiatrist even emphasizes that Norman was not aware of committing the murders.
He was never all Norman, but he was often only Mother.
His jealousy of his mother's attraction to other men then caused the Norma half of him to take over whenever he felt a strong attraction to another woman. This is why he killed Marion and those two other girls. Now this seems like common stuff today because we're all like watching psychology videos on YouTube like 24/7. But back in the day, people hadn't really, been besotted by serial killers like we are today. This was truly an unheard level of psychosis shown on film before. Hitchcock spared no detail conveying just how disturbed that Norman is, and you have to realize this is way before the FBI had like the behavioral science division. Psychologists hadn't really looked at serial killers before as in depth, and would be decades before they really started to think about how they think. Just quickly before we dissect this, as the psychiatrist gives this explanation, he's framed beneath a light. This is almost like a eureka moment and someone coming to a bright idea. Now this showcases another one of Hitchcock's cardinal rules of suspense in providing the audience with answers. Hitchcock firmly believed that any confusion of the plot would take away from the audience's emotional reaction to the film. Thus he sought to simplify everything to create the maximum amount of impact. Which I do kind of get, because like the amount of times I've left a movie that I've enjoyed but it's been ambiguous, and then people around me have been like, it was fucking shit, they didn't even explain anything. You can kind of get why, he felt the need to explain things. Here we get not only a play-by-play of everything we've just witnessed, but also gain an understanding of what we've just saw, bringing an entirely new level of terror as we contemplate the dark and twisted mind of Norman. It also begs the audience to go back and rewatch the film. We now have a new understanding and will have an entirely different experience now we know this information. This is kind of what's ensured its longevity and why it broke the bank at the box office. We then close out the film with Norman sitting in his cell as his mother berates him in his head. She says how he's always been bad and that she should have put him away herself. She also mentions how Norman planned to frame her for the murders.
As if I could do anything except just sit and stare, like one of his stuffed birds.
Now this is a really interesting line as it shows Norman is somewhat aware of what he's doing, with the Norma personality able to recognise she's not physically there. We then close in on Norman's face as his mother says she'll just sit there and do nothing so the police won't suspect her. She even refuses to swat a fly.
Why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
We then hang on a close-up of Norman as he smiles directly at the camera. We then fade to Marion's car being pulled out the swamp, and this brings the story full circle. We and Marion now return to the real world, and we're once more back on the other side of the Mobius strip. However, Norman at this point is consumed by his double, which we get with some amazing superimposition. While fading from Norman's face, you can see Norma's skulls placed over the top of it. It's such a chilling way to close out the movie and one of my favourite details in the film. This is layered over the chain used to pull the car, which goes right through his heart. In the end, the meaning that it carries is Norman, Norma and Marion are forever chained together as one.
And that's
everything you could want to know about Psycho. Taking a deep dive into this movie, it's easy to see why this film is considered the gold standard of horror movies and one of the best films of all time. Even in today's age, it's incredible, like the sheer amount of detail, and Hitchcock has put so much thought into this film to basically shock audiences. The scares still last all this time after, and I don't think, Hitchcock would have imagined someone like me on YouTube analyzing every single frame of the film 65 years later. And it's probably something he most likely would have not liked. But I hope you've enjoyed it, and all these seemingly small details really help you appreciate the artistry of Hitchcock's direction. Despite nearly every horror and slasher following in Psycho's footsteps, few have been able to replicate the suspense and effectiveness of their inspiration. This is the best of the best of the best, sir, and in my opinion, one of the greatest horrors ever. And probably one of the greatest movies ever as well. And that's it for this breakdown. I know it was a long one, but there was a lot of details to talk about, and yeah, there's probably even more that I've missed. So if you know some, I'd love to hear them, because it will just make me appreciate this movie more. Huge thank you for sticking to the end, and I also want to shout out our researcher TJ, who put everything into finding all the best details in this movie. You can follow him at The Fat Thor on Twitter, but yeah, massive applause to him. He's really helped me go through this movie, and yeah, the reason it's so long is because we've had two guys watching it who overanalyze everything. But yeah, if you like nerds, then go check them out. If you want to follow me as well and keep up to date with what I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram at Heavy Spoilers. Did you know as well, members of the channel also get early access to videos like this every single week. If you click the join button for just 99 cents a month, less than $12 a year, you get videos like this every week, and yeah, it all goes towards helping these videos get made in the first place. We really appreciate it. 99 cents. I hope that's not a lot to you, but if a lot of you guys do it, it means a lot to us, and yeah, just means we can keep doing these in-depth breakdowns. If not though, thank you so much for watching anyway. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Peace.